Ambassador Marcus Chen stood in the center of the Grand Assembly Hall, his simple black diplomatic suit looking painfully ordinary among the elaborate armor, bioluminescent robes, and crystalline exoskeletons of the galaxy's most powerful military commanders. The massive chamber stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, its walls lined with viewing galleries where representatives from 300 alien species watched the proceedings with obvious amusement. The Zephyrian General Crixith clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his insectoid species. His voice boomed through the hall's translation system, the mechanical tone unable to hide his condescension. So the humans send us a diplomat to discuss military matters. How quaint. A ripple of similar sounds echoed throughout the chamber. The Velcoran delegation, their tentacles writhing with mirth, produced wet, slapping sounds against their environmental suits. The crystalline Nexari chimed in harmonic frequencies that their translators rendered as barely contained chuckling. Even the usually stoic Drachmori, massive reptilian beings whose scales could deflect plasma fire, allowed themselves low rumbling growls of amusement. Marcus remained perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. He had expected this reception. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Coalition, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Compared to civilizations that had been waging interstellar wars for millennia, humanity was seen as a curious anomaly, a species that had somehow stumbled into the galactic community through luck rather than strength. "General Crixth," Marcus said, his voice calm and measured, despite the jeers echoing around him. "I appreciate the Coalition's willingness to hear our proposal for the Outer Rim territories." "Proposal?" The Nexari Prime Resonator's crystalline form pulsed with colors that translated to derision. "You speak as if humans have something to offer in military matters. Your species has been part of the Coalition for barely half a century. Some of us have been fighting wars since before your son was born." More laughter erupted from the galleries. Marcus noticed how the various species seemed to compete with each other in their displays of amusement, as if mocking humanity had become a form of entertainment. The Zephyrians clicked louder, the Velcorans slapped more vigorously, and the Drachmori's growls grew deeper and more rumbling. The human delegation sat in a small section near the floor of the chamber, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Admiral Sarah Rodriguez, the highest-ranking human military officer present, shifted in her seat. Her jaw was tight with barely controlled anger, and Marcus could see her hands clenched into fists on the armrests of her chair. Beside her, General Thompson's face had turned red, and several other officers were whispering urgently among themselves. Marcus had specifically requested to handle this alone, despite their protests. They thought he was naive, that diplomatic niceties would be lost on these warriors who respected only strength. But Marcus knew something they didn't. He had learned it the hard way, through years of studying not just alien cultures, but alien histories. He understood what they truly feared, even if they didn't realize it themselves. "You find our inexperience amusing," Marcus continued, seemingly unbothered by the continuing mockery, "and perhaps rightfully so. We are indeed young compared to your great civilizations." General Crixith's compound eyes glittered with satisfaction. "At least you admit your limitations. Perhaps there is hope for your species yet, if you can learn to know your place." The insect-like general gestured with one of his forearms toward the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. It showed the Outer Rim territories, a vast region of space that had been contested for over 2 centuries. Dozens of systems were marked in red, indicating active conflict zones where the Coalition's various factions were locked in endless territorial disputes. "These conflicts require experienced warriors," Crixith declared, "beings who understand the true nature of war. Your people have fought only among themselves on a single world. What could you possibly know of interstellar combat?" Very little, Marcus admitted, which prompted another wave of laughter. Our largest conflicts involved millions of soldiers. Yours involve billions across multiple star systems. Our weapons could destroy cities. Yours can crack planets. You are absolutely right that we lack experience in warfare on such scales. Admiral Rodriguez looked like she wanted to sink into her chair. The human delegation was exchanging worried glances, clearly wondering if Marcus had lost his mind. Even the alien representatives seemed surprised by such frank admissions of weakness. Usually, species presenting to the assembly tried to exaggerate their capabilities, not openly acknowledge their limitations. The Velcoran Admiral Gorthnak's tentacles writhed as his translator conveyed his thoughts. Then why waste our time? If you acknowledge your inadequacy, perhaps humans should remain in their small corner of the galaxy and leave important matters to those capable of handling them. Because, Marcus said, his voice carrying just a hint of something harder beneath the diplomatic courtesy. Warfare isn't just about scale or experience, it's about will. And there's something you should understand about human will. The laughter began to die down slightly. There was something in the human's tone that was different. Not threatening exactly, but there was a quality to it that made even the most battle-hardened veterans pay attention. 15 years ago, Marcus continued, my son David was an anthropologist. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a fighter. He was a scholar who studied ancient civilizations. He volunteered for a peaceful research mission to the Kepler 442 system, working alongside coalition scientists to study the ruins of the extinct Prothean civilization. The chamber had grown noticeably quieter. Several of the alien commanders shifted uncomfortably. The Kepler 442 incident was well known throughout coalition space, but rarely discussed in official settings. The research station was attacked by unknown raiders, Marcus said, his voice still calm, but with an underlying tension that seemed to fill the massive chamber. 47 scientists from 12 different species were taken. The coalition mounted a rescue operation, as was proper and right. General Crixith's mandibles clicked nervously. The mission was complicated. The raiders had taken the hostages to an uncharted system. By the time coalition forces located them, the trail had gone cold. Cold, Marcus repeated. Yes, that's the word the coalition used. Cold. The official report stated that after 3 months of searching, the mission was classified as a loss. The hostages were presumed dead. Case closed. The Nexari Prime Resonator's crystalline form had stopped pulsing with amused colors and was now emitting a steady, nervous blue light. Ambassador Chen, the coalition committed significant resources to that search. Every military protocol was followed. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, I'm not here to criticize the coalition's efforts, Marcus interrupted, his voice still perfectly controlled. I understand that difficult decisions must be made. Resources are finite. When a trail goes cold, military commanders must consider the broader strategic picture. You cannot commit infinite resources to every tragedy. The human delegation was now watching Marcus with intense focus. Admiral Rodriguez's eyes had widened as she realized where this was heading. She had been part of the coalition forces that had eventually called off the search for the Kepler 442 hostages. But you see, Marcus continued, humans have a different perspective on cold trails. We don't see them as endpoints. We see them as challenges. Because for us, it was never about resources or strategic calculations. It was about my son. The massive chamber had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the various species breathing, clicking, and humming had faded to nothing. Every eye, compound or otherwise, was fixed on the human diplomat standing alone in the center of the floor. So when the coalition called off the search after 3 months, Marcus said, I resigned from my position as Earth's trade secretary. I liquidated my family's assets. I hired private investigators, mercenaries, information brokers, anyone who might have knowledge of where those raiders had taken the hostages. His hand slowly reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a small data pad. The simple gesture somehow seemed to carry enormous weight in the silent chamber. "It took me 12 years," Marcus said softly. 12 years of following cold trails across the galaxy. 12 years of asking questions in spaceports and criminal hideouts that coalition forces would never visit. 12 years of learning things about the dark corners of our galaxy that most civilized species prefer to ignore. The Drakmori Supreme Commander Vashatar, whose species was renowned for their legendary patience in hunting prey, leaned forward in his massive chair. His voice was a low rumble when he spoke. "And what did you find, human?" Marcus looked up at the towering reptilian commander, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "I found them all," he said simply. The silence in the Grand Assembly Hall was absolute. Marcus activated his data pad, and holographic images began to appear above the central display. The first image showed a massive asteroid mining facility hidden in the debris field of a destroyed planet, far beyond any charted space. "The Broken Crown Syndicate," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed chamber. "A criminal organization that the Coalition has been hunting for over a century. They specialize in capturing scientists and forcing them to develop weapons technology. The facility you're seeing was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the Vega Mortis system." The images shifted, showing detailed schematics of the facility's layout, security systems, and guard rotations. General Crixith's compound eyes dilated as he recognized the level of detail in the intelligence. This wasn't information gathered from a safe distance. Someone had been inside. The Syndicate had been using the captured scientists to develop a new form of quantum disruptor weapon, Marcus continued, something that could tear apart molecular bonds at the subatomic level. If completed, it would have made their ships effectively unstoppable against any known shielding technology. Admiral Rodriguez was staring at Marcus with a mixture of amazement and horror. The Coalition had been searching for the Broken Crown Syndicate for decades without success. Their raids appeared seemingly from nowhere, struck with precision, and vanished back into the void. Yet this human diplomat was speaking about them as if he had personal knowledge of their operations. "How did you find them?" the Velcoran Admiral Gorthnok asked, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "Coalition intelligence has been tracking the Syndicate since before your species achieved spaceflight." Marcus touched his data pad again, and the display shifted to show a series of seemingly unconnected events across multiple star systems. Bar fights, smuggling arrests, minor piracy incidents, and black market transactions were highlighted in chronological order. The Coalition was looking for big patterns, Marcus explained. Fleet movements, major criminal activities, significant intelligence chatter. But the Syndicate survived by being small and careful. They used independent contractors for most of their operations. Freelance smugglers who didn't know who their ultimate employer was. Information brokers who sold data without understanding its true value. Mercenaries hired through third parties for seemingly unrelated jobs. The display zoomed in on specific incidents, showing how each seemingly minor event was actually part of a larger supply chain feeding the hidden facility. A fight in a cantina on Rigel 7th involved a smuggler carrying rare materials. A customs arrest near Altair revealed electronics components that seemed destined for nowhere. A mercenary hiring on Proxima Centauri was paid with currency that could be traced through 6 intermediaries back to the same source. "You followed individual threads," the Nexari Prime Resonator observed, his crystalline form pulsing with what his translator rendered as grudging respect. "Most intelligence services look for large-scale patterns, but you tracked personal connections." "I had advantages that Coalition intelligence didn't," Marcus replied. "I wasn't bound by jurisdiction or diplomatic protocols. I could go places and ask questions that official investigators couldn't. More importantly, I wasn't looking for the syndicate itself. I was looking for my son. He activated another section of his data pad, and images of the hostages appeared above the display. 47 faces from a dozen different species, including a young human man who bore a strong resemblance to Marcus himself. Personal connection creates different investigative patterns, Marcus explained. When you're hunting for someone specific, you ask different questions. You talk to their friends, their colleagues, their mentors. You learn their habits, their preferences, their weaknesses. And when you do that for 47 different individuals, you create a web of personal information that reveals things no amount of strategic intelligence can uncover. The images shifted again, showing a timeline of the rescue operation. The first phase had been reconnaissance, with Marcus somehow infiltrating the facility as a maintenance worker. The level of detail in his surveillance footage was extraordinary, showing not just the layout of the prison sections, but detailed psychological profiles of individual guards and administrators. "You went in alone," Admiral Rodriguez said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A single human, with no military training, infiltrated the most secure criminal facility in known space." "I had help," Marcus said, and for the first time, something approaching warmth entered his voice. David had made friends among the other hostages during their captivity, scientists from different species, but they had formed bonds, supported each other, shared knowledge. When I finally made contact, they had been planning their own escape attempt. The display showed the second phase of the rescue, a coordinated breakout that utilized the unique skills of each hostage. The Nexari physicist had found a way to disrupt the facility's crystalline power matrix. The Velkaran chemist had synthesized explosive compounds from cleaning supplies. The Zephyrian engineer had reprogrammed the security systems. And David, the human anthropologist, had been studying guard patterns and psychological weaknesses for months. The escape itself was remarkable, General Crix admitted, his mandibles clicking with what might have been approval. "But how did you get them out of the system? The syndicate would have had pursuit ships, long-range sensors." Marcus smiled again, and this time there was definitely something predatory in the expression. "We didn't leave the system immediately. That would have been expected. Instead, we stayed and finished what the hostages had started." The final phase of the operation appeared on the display, showing the systematic destruction of the syndicate facility. It wasn't the quick demolition that a military raid might have accomplished. This was thorough, methodical sabotage that left nothing salvageable. The weapons research was not just destroyed, but corrupted, ensuring that any backup data would be worthless. The manufacturing equipment was dismantled piece by piece. Even the asteroid itself was destabilized, ensuring it would eventually break apart and scatter across the debris field. 47 scientists, Marcus said quietly. Physicists, chemists, engineers, anthropologists, biologists, mathematicians. When you give brilliant minds a common goal and the tools to achieve it, amazing things become possible. The Drakmori Supreme Commander Vashatar was studying the tactical breakdown with the intense focus of a lifelong warrior. This was not merely a rescue operation. This was a declaration of war against the entire syndicate organization. "It was personal," Marcus corrected. "But yes, we made sure they understood that taking hostages from a peaceful research mission would have consequences." The display shifted one final time, showing current intelligence on the Broken Crown Syndicate. Their organization had never recovered from the loss of the Vega Mortis facility. Without their advanced weapons research, they had been unable to maintain their technological edge over coalition forces. Within 2 years of the rescue operation, most of their leadership had been captured or killed. The syndicate still existed in fragments, but they were no longer the galaxy-spanning threat they had once been. "One human diplomat," the Velkoran Admiral Gorthnak said slowly. accomplished what coalition forces had failed to achieve in over a century. One father, Marcus corrected gently, who had help from 47 friends. The alien commanders were looking at Marcus with very different expressions now. The amusement and condescension had been replaced by something approaching respect, mixed with a healthy dose of wariness. They were beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood not just Marcus himself, but possibly humanity as a whole. The Nexari Prime Resonator's crystalline form was pulsing with deep blue light, which his translator rendered as thoughtfulness mixed with concern. Ambassador Chen, this is an impressive account of personal determination and resourcefulness, but surely you're not suggesting that such methods could be applied to large-scale military operations. Marcus deactivated his datapad and looked around the massive chamber, meeting the eyes of dozens of different species. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet certainty that somehow seemed to fill the entire space. "Generals, you've been asking the wrong question," he said. "You've been asking what humans can contribute to your military efforts. But the question you should be asking is much simpler." His expression hardened, and suddenly the diplomatic courtesy was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "Who took my son?" The chamber erupted into chaos as the implications hit home. Every species represented in the assembly had enemies, rivals, territorial disputes. They were all someone's opposition, someone's target, someone's problem to be solved, and they had just learned that humans didn't solve problems the way other species did. Humans took things personally. General Crixth was the first to speak, his voice uncertain for the first time since the session began. "Ambassador Chen, surely you're not threatening the coalition." Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "General, I would never threaten the coalition. You're our allies." "But the beings causing trouble in the Outer Rim territories?" His smile returned, cold and patient. "Well, that depends entirely on their answer to a very simple question." 6 months later, the Outer Rim territories were experiencing the strangest military campaign in galactic history. It wasn't being fought with massive fleets or devastating weapons. Instead, it was being conducted by small teams of humans who seemed to appear from nowhere, ask very specific questions, and then disappear back into the void. Captain Sarah Martinez crouched behind a shipping container on the smuggling depot of Kepler 438b, watching the Harkonnen cartel guards through her scope. The depot was supposedly neutral territory, a place where criminals from across the Outer Rim could conduct business without interference. But intelligence suggested that the cartel was supplying weapons to the separatist factions that had been raiding coalition shipping lanes. "Target acquired," she whispered into her comm unit. 3 Harkonnen officers in the main administrative building." "Remember the protocol," came the reply from her handler, Colonel David Chen, Ambassador Marcus Chen's son, who now served as the primary coordinator for what had become known as the Human Personal Initiative. "We're not here to start a fight. We're here to ask a question." Martinez nodded and activated her translation unit. The plan was simple, almost absurdly so. Walk up to the criminal leaders, identify herself as a human representative, and ask if they or anyone they knew had been involved in attacks on coalition civilians. Then wait for their answer. It sounded insane to anyone trained in conventional military tactics, but the results spoke for themselves. In the past 6 months, 17 different criminal organizations had voluntarily ceased their operations in the Outer Rim. Not because they were afraid of human military might, but because they were afraid of human attention. Martinez made her way through the depot, past alien smugglers and black market dealers who barely glanced at the lone human walking among them. Her casual appearance was deceptive. She was a former Special Forces operator with extensive experience in infiltration and reconnaissance. But more importantly, she was Lieutenant Rodriguez's daughter, and Lieutenant Rodriguez had been stationed aboard the research vessel that had been attacked at Kepler 442 15 years ago. She had seen what humans did when their people were threatened. The administrative building was surprisingly lightly guarded. Martinez walked past two Harkonnen sentries who seemed more interested in their gambling game than in monitoring visitors. She reached the main office and knocked politely on the door. "Enter," came a gravelly voice from inside. The office was decorated with trophies from dozens of different worlds, clear evidence of the cartel's wide-ranging criminal activities. 3 Harkonnen officers sat around a holographic planning table, examining shipping routes and cargo manifests. They looked up in surprise as the human woman entered their private meeting. "Gentlemen," Martinez said pleasantly, "I'm Captain Sarah Martinez, representing the Human Diplomatic Corps. I'd like to ask you a question." The largest of the Harkonnen, a scarred brute with cybernetic implants replacing one arm, laughed harshly. "A human. Here? You're either very brave or very stupid, little mammal." "Probably both," Martinez admitted cheerfully. "But I still need to ask my question. Have you or anyone in your organization been involved in attacks on coalition civilian vessels in the past year?" The 3 criminals exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. This wasn't how raids usually began. Where were the demands for surrender? The threats of violence? The accusations and ultimatums? "That's it?" the second Harkonnen asked. "That's your question?" "That's my question," Martinez confirmed. The leader leaned back in his chair, studying the human with newfound interest. Word had been spreading through criminal circles about humans and their unusual approach to problem-solving. The story of the Broken Crown Syndicate had become something of a legend in the underworld, though most criminals assumed it had been exaggerated for effect. "And what if we have?" he asked carefully. Martinez shrugged. "Then we'll want to know why, and who gave the orders, and where we can find them." "And if we don't tell you?" "Then we'll find out anyway," Martinez said simply. "It might take a while, but we're very patient and very thorough." The third Harkonnen, who had been silent during the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "You're serious, aren't you? You people actually do this. Hunt individuals across the galaxy for personal reasons." "We prefer to think of it as following up on unfinished business," Martinez replied. "But yes, we're quite serious about it." The leader was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he activated his comm unit and spoke rapidly in his native language. Martinez's translator converted his words into standard Galactic. "Suspend all operations against Coalition targets immediately. Full stop." "Sir?" one of his subordinates asked in confusion. "You heard me. No more attacks on Coalition shipping. No more weapons sales to separatist groups, and send word to our competitors. Anyone who continues targeting Coalition civilians is on their own." Martinez smiled and inclined her head politely. "Thank you for your cooperation. Have a pleasant day, gentlemen." As she left the building, her comm unit chimed with an encrypted message from Colonel Chen. "How did it go, Captain?" "Another voluntary cessation of hostilities," Martinez reported. "They've agreed to suspend all anti-coalition activities." "Outstanding. That brings our total to 18 organizations in 6 months." Martinez made her way back through the depot, noting how word of her conversation was already spreading among the various criminal elements. She could hear whispered conversations in dozens of languages, but the universal translator picked up the same themes: humans, questions, consequences. The genius of the human personal initiative wasn't in its military effectiveness, though that was certainly significant. The genius was in its psychological impact. For the first time in galactic history, criminal organizations had to consider not just the immediate military response to their actions, but the long-term personal consequences. Every attack on coalition civilians now carried the possibility that someday, perhaps years later, a human would come asking questions. And humans, as the galaxy was learning, were extraordinarily good at getting answers. Meanwhile, in the Grand Assembly Hall, Ambassador Marcus Chen was delivering his final report on the Outer Rim situation to the same commanders who had mocked him 6 months earlier. The massive chamber was silent as he presented the statistical analysis of their success. "Piracy in the contested systems is down by 73%, Marcus reported. Attacks on civilian shipping have decreased by 85%. Weapons smuggling to separatist groups has been reduced by 92%. General Crixth's compound eyes studied the data displays with obvious amazement. "These numbers are unprecedented, Ambassador Chen. But I must ask, is this approach sustainable? You cannot personally investigate every crime in the galaxy." Marcus smiled. "You're absolutely right, General. But we don't need to investigate every crime. We just need criminals to believe that we might. The key to effective deterrence isn't perfect enforcement. It's perfect uncertainty." The Nexari Prime Resonator's crystalline form pulsed with deep blue light. "You've created a myth," he observed. "The legend of human persistence has become more effective than any weapon." "Not a myth," Marcus corrected gently. "A promise. When someone targets our people, or our allies' people, they're not just committing a crime against a faceless government. They're making it personal, and humans excel at taking things personally." The Velcoran Admiral Gorthnak's tentacles writhed thoughtfully. "But what about larger threats? Nation-states? Major military powers? Surely this approach cannot work against organized government forces?" Marcus activated his datapad one final time, displaying a communication that had been received just that morning. It was from the Tau Ceti Republic, one of the most aggressive separatist factions in the Outer Rim. "To the Human Diplomatic Corps," the message read. "After careful consideration of recent events and their implications, the Tau Ceti Republic formally requests to begin negotiations for readmission to the Galactic Coalition. We are prepared to discuss terms for ceasing all hostile activities against Coalition member species." The chamber erupted in surprised chatter. The Tau Ceti Republic had been one of the most intractable opponents of Coalition expansion, fighting a guerrilla war for over 3 decades. Their sudden willingness to negotiate was completely unprecedented. "They're afraid," the Drakmori Supreme Commander Vashatar rumbled with something that might have been approval. "Not of human military might, but of human attention. They understand that every act of aggression against the Coalition now carries the possibility of personal consequences for their leadership." Marcus nodded. "Fear is a powerful motivator, but it's not our primary goal. Our goal is simply to make it clear that actions have consequences. That crimes against innocents will not be forgotten or ignored. That somewhere in the galaxy, someone will remember, someone will care, and someone will come asking questions." General Crixth leaned forward in his chair. "And if they refuse to answer those questions?" "Then we'll find the answers ourselves," Marcus replied. "It might take time. It might require considerable effort, but we'll find them. Because that's what humans do when someone takes our sun." The silence that followed was profound. Every commander in the chamber understood the implications. The galaxy had operated for millennia on the assumption that large-scale crimes could be hidden in the vast emptiness of space, that individual victims would be forgotten in the scope of interstellar politics. The humans had changed that fundamental assumption. As the session concluded and the various delegations began to disperse, Admiral Rodriguez approached Marcus with an expression of wonder and concern. "Sir, I have to ask, what happens when this approach eventually fails? When we encounter someone who isn't afraid of human attention?" Marcus looked out through the chamber's massive viewing ports at the stars beyond, thinking of his son David, now safely home on Earth after 12 years of captivity. Thinking of the 47 scientists who had become the most effective special operations unit in galactic history. thinking of the thousands of coalition civilians who were now safer because criminals across the galaxy had learned a simple lesson about human nature. "Then, Admiral," he said quietly, "they'll learn why fear was the smart choice." The human personal initiative had begun with one father's refusal to accept that some crimes were too cold to solve. It had evolved into the most effective peacekeeping operation in galactic history. And it would endure because it was based on a simple truth that every species in the galaxy was beginning to understand. Humans take things personally. And in a universe where governments rise and fall, where military alliances shift and change, where the political landscape transforms with each passing century, personal commitments endure. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a human was asking a very simple question. Who took my son? And the galaxy was learning that this question demanded an answer,